Happy Friday! We made it
Happy
again.
Friday.
Small victories, right? It's Friday, it's around lunchtime if you're in Ontario, and we're about to unpack this week's headlines, but not in the dry, distasteful way that mainstream media does. We're a little bit more fired up, and we're going to talk about what these headlines mean for the movements that we're all working on right now. We have with us a special guest this week. I mean, Joe is here. Joe is special. Welcome, Joe.
Special in my
Um,
own way. I get it.
no, we love Joe. He's a stalwart. But Aliya Pabani is with us today. I just messaged her last minute and got very, very lucky to have her come on. I've had her on Blueprints of Disruption. I love that episode. I've referred to it many times, talking about the artists uniting against the war on Gaza in many different ways. But welcome, Aliya.
Thanks for having me back. And I'm really good at last minute things, even better than plan ahead things. So just so you know.
She's rolling with it. She's rolling with it. So yeah, no, if it's your first time like Aliya, we start by unpacking some of the headlines. Today we're going to talk about our new prime minister. A lot of people are just as smitten with this one as when the last one came in, so we've got work to do. Especially when it comes to talking about his chief of staff. So, but we'll let that unfold as it does. Obviously, I'm fired up. I've been brushing up on the timeline for Mahmoud Khalil, Columbia University student who has been detained by ICE. So we're going to talk about that. Obviously, that impacts us and what we talk about weekly in terms of resisting and the response the state has to that. Joe is going to walk us through a Canadian being detained by ICE as well. They're not the only ones. Obviously, it's a broader discussion there. And we really can't ever go a week without giving an update on Gaza. We'll talk about Israel and their turning off the electricity and what other forms of blockade that they've stepped up. And we'll round it out again with more CanCon and talk about the UN criticizing Canada for its track record on disability rights, specifically around MAID and the issues that are brought up there. So that's the first half. And then the second half is, disruptive updates. What is the grassroots doing? What are the calls to action? What are the responses been like to some of the campaigns out there? So you'll get some updates on what's going on, mostly in Canada, but we do tend to go global as well. And then at the end, I get to take a moment off, and Aliya is going to do the activist tip of the week. And I knew she'd have plenty. I was very relieved when you're like, yeah, I got this. And I was like, because I know you're full of them. I wasn't sure what you were going to bring. It'll be a surprise for all of us. So stay tuned till the end for that. Are you? I'm sure you've got. It was a matter of choosing which tips to share, because I've already picked your brain for that work you folks did around Scotiabank, and there were some victories there, eh? Like, I don't mean to. We should go into the headlines, but I haven't spoken to you since Scotiabank and the Giller Prize broke up. So, congratulations on on being the wedge in that, or being part of the wedge of that in that relationship there. So,
yeah, thank you. There has been a little bit of a update that we haven't really put out publicly yet, but we have plans around it. But in the last public announcement of their the changes in that investment, they actually announced that they increased their stake by 80 million for the first time
in Elbit Systems.
Yeah, for the first time since the last quarter of 2023, which they've been steadily decreasing their stake. So just a reminder that
no wonder you didn't want to share that. You weren't so eager to share that one.
Well, sorry. It's still a massive divestment. I think I don't want to go into it too much, but I do think that there is, in some ways, there's a narrative reason and an ethical reason to go after Scotiabank around their Elbit investment, but if they like sell off their stake, someone else is going to purchase it, you know? Whereas there's a lot of institutions in Canada who are like materially supporting Israel on the order of millions of dollars and have charity status. And like, you know, say you go after Heseg or an organization like that, like the ones that you would really be accused of being anti-Semitic for going after, that's like, you know, $40 million out of Israel. And, you know, and I think that that's sort of the stage that we're at. We need to actually start thinking about how power functions and like how money flows. And I think we need to like not shy away from expanding our fight, and also, you know, like connecting it to like a global sort of like anti-imperialist struggle. Anyway, that's I was like, I'm not going to go into it, and then I'm like,
I feel like that's the kernel of an episode I'm going to bug you about.
you know,
because yeah, it's not the first time we talked about divestment, and it's just like, where do you go from there? But let's celebrate. We have a new prime minister. I mean, on last week's Rabble Rants, we're not celebrating Mark Carney, by the way, but just something new to talk about. But we promised that, you know, that we got our last into Trudeau, right? I can't even remember what we were talking about that he did, but you know, it was the last time we could blame him. Other people will blame him as we move forward. But new target, talk about selecting targets. That's foreshadowing. Our new target's Mark Carney, and I actually took slack on X for calling him a banker. I mean, it wasn't a majority of people by any means, but it was a Pally supporter. It was a progressive, and I've kind of heard liberal-esque, you know, they don't know where they stand right now, but environmentalists. And they were very, very hopeful. You know, they've read his book. They think he's going to put empathy back into capitalism. And I'm feeling like we are slipping, like we are losing, like the liberals had done a good job of showing us who they really were, right? And now they're rebranding, and they're doing a really good job of it. And it's very frustrating. Anyone, before we get to his chief of staff pick, which is kind of solidifies how we're feeling about him right now. Anybody else? Like, is anyone hopeful? Like, or you?
So
do you have to talk anyone down here?
Yeah, no, I'm really in sort of a mixed sort of emotions in regards to Carney, and we're gonna get into quite a bit of it as we're gonna get through it. But on the initial surface, I mean, it is better than Pierre. There are certain things I kind of expect, and unfortunately, we're in this kind of a weird place where right now we're dealing with a threat from the south, a very serious threat from the south. We're also dealing with Pierre, who's also a serious threat to. I'm sorry, I feel he would sell us to the south. Like I don't think it's off the table. To now where we're looking at between Jagmeet and now Carney in regards to Hope, and I'm like, you are all the lesser of the, you know, you guys are the lesser of the evils. It's kind of a weird thing to kind of view it, but it is what it is. So I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel.
I can tell you. Yeah. No, I won't do that. I mean, if you need help, Aliya will help too.
No, and obviously, I think we all feel kind of similar in that, but it's just sort of, it's just never sort of. I can't ever get a full good feeling, I guess.
There's a Luke Savage piece I have linked in the notes, Linkmaster, because I've got this little dinky laptop that might explode if I open another tab. But I mean, he does a good job of unpacking Carney. This is before Carney was anointed. Side note, like watching Freeland get crushed and get 8%, it inspired me to even make some crummy TikTok. I was just kind of giddy. You have to find joy wherever we can find it at this point. And so watching her get squeezed by whoever was sitting with her partner there, and just that person was just squishing her, hold on, lady. And she's doing the math. It's 8%, and she's trying to keep that smile on. And I mean, that was my moment. But in the Savage piece there, the problem with Carney-ism, He does a good job, Luke Savage. It's a Substack there, but there's a quote there he pulls from Carney that I'm going to read. And it's kind of like red flags. A lot of the things he's done already are red flags. You know, he's gotten rid of the capital gains increase. That's like, hey, rich people, don't worry, I'm good. He's like, I'm good. I'm one of you. I understand. And then the carbon tax. I mean, if you guys want to talk about the carbon tax, it's not so much the carbon tax that I support, but it's like, yeah, he just took those checks away from poor people without replacing them. It was like, And I think a lot of people are going to get a reality check there where they're like, fuck the carbon tax, but they have been budgeting that money. So, anyway, but the quote from Savage, you know, this is Carney. He talks about, you know, I'm the lesser evil, right? Like, you can't deal with Pierre. And we can't achieve our full potential with the ideas of the far left. They too often see government as the solution to every problem, with a reflex to spend and subsidize that just treats the symptoms of the problem but doesn't cure the disease. And then I wrote in my notes, blah, 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 strong economy. So, I mean, he goes on after that to say the cure is a stronger form of capitalism, a healthier economy. Aliya, do you agree with that? That sounds like austerity to me. I don't know. I'm trying to read between the lines because he's really slick, this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think he he genuinely seems like he really like is a true believer in capitalism, and that he believes that, like, you know, corporations are, like, you know, innovators, and they will be the solution to all our problems and all of those things. And I think, you know, usually the liberals, that is like still you know, predominantly the view, and you know, they're still, you know, even under Trudeau, they did some, like, I think that I mean, in part because of the NDP coalition, I think, like, a little bit of a push from the NDP, they did do some interesting things that were helpful, like, you know, I mean, it's still means tested, right? Like
You're talking about dental,
the
pharmacare.
dental, and even just things like people don't talk about, like the increase to like federal like SHIRK grants and things like that. I remember like hearing from friends of mine who were doing their PhDs and like poverty level incomes, and then they were like, suddenly my SHIRK was like double the amount. But I think that, like, in a different era, you know, they like cover it over with this, you know, like, we want to, you know, make sure the most vulnerable get the care they need and all of that. But I feel like we're getting like the worst side of liberalism right now with Carney, because he knows that he doesn't need to do that actually to beat Poilievre. Like, what he needs to do is just move people who would, you know, otherwise be supporting like conservative fiscal policy and vote for Poilievre, but instead they're like, okay, here's the guy who's like not as aligned with Trump, who still fundamentally believes the same things.
Yeah, I think he because of the job he's done for so long, his real danger lay in, you know, the 60% of people who don't vote conservative would never even think about it, you know, for the most part, and selling them on neoliberalism. Right? Like doing it and like, here's the solution. You don't want Pierre Poilievre, but, you know, you got to give me something, and we've got to, you know, appease capital, or, you know, walk that centrist line. And it's just pulling more and more people to that center. And you see Elizabeth May scrambling. You don't know how much you can take as rumor, but a lot of it makes print that there's coalition talk that even going into the next federal election, they're trying to make agreements on who will run where in the, you know, a la France example that a lot of people use that failed miserably in the end, right? It failed. They would not let the left lead in the government, no matter how strong part of the coalition that they were. It was siding with the far right ended up being what they did. They didn't keep that coalition. So, but yeah, so just more and more people just taking those solutions. And like Carney's been very open to say, like, he doesn't speak very highly of the social safety net. He like when he's on American television, he's like, oh, this is what sets us apart. But when he's talking to us, it's like austerity, austerity, austerity. But like really, like real slick. Like I said before, like he talks about it in a way that you're gonna have people going, yeah, that sounds logical, you know. And so, I mean, time will tell. But I just that time period that we allow new leaders is also kind of a little nerve-wracking to think like a lot of people are going to just sit back and wait to see what to expect and likely be hyper-fixated on what Trump is doing at the moment, because like we talk about Trump because he impacts our politicians and all of that, but one thing he is doing in all of these things is he's creating a huge distraction for our politicians as well, right? And so like what is Carney going to get away with either in the shadow of Trump's actions or justified by Trump's threats, right? Like, what is he going to say? But we need this to protect Canada. We need that to protect Canada, just like we did after 9/11, right? Like, we allowed this threat. It was manufactured to a large part. And
Patriot Act.
Yeah, and we reshaped our legal system to a large degree, and we stripped people of their rights. And, like, most Canadians were like, yeah, like, you know, it's needed. So I just like keep eyes on Carney, and I just like I'm not one to give anybody any kind of grace period. That's all. I guess I'm not very generous in that way. I don't want anyone to give someone that powerful the benefit of the doubt. I think they have to kind of earn it. But
well, he's been pretty explicit though. I think like it's not like there are other options on the table. Like either you believe in like in a moment of crisis like we're in, you either believe in like social programs and increasing funding for things like that, or you believe in like, you know, the austerity measures that he's very explicitly said he supports. Like the interesting thing about the capital gains tax is I remember, so I have like a gig that is like you know, it's like a podcast gig that's like so easy and pays a lot, but it's also like engaging with like business council podcast people, like the people who make the business council podcast. And they're like, I mean, they're kind of the worst people. I don't know why I get hired through an agency to do it. So I don't think they like know who I am or what I say or what I do. So, which is interesting because the kinds of things they say in front of me is like fascinating. They're just like, oh, this is the laborer. Like she doesn't know anything. So we don't need to be worried about what we say. But I remember when Trudeau announced the capital gains tax, like they were pissed. Like they could not stop talking about like this guy, head of the business council, was like on his phone all day, just like frantically texting, and he was like feverishly angry. That was when they were starting to talk about like, hey, how do we get rid of this guy? So, and then the other thing that I want to say about, I mean, it's a little bit off topic for Carney, but I'm just like stunned. Can we just like acknowledge how strange it is, how like the Liberals will always like pull off like a Hail Mary move in the like there it's just like this year I feel like I had been reassured by like friends of mine and comrades who like follow like electoral politics more closely, and they're like, you know, about like over a year ago I was like, looks like, you know, while the Liberals are taking heat, the Conservatives and Per Polyev are doing their like campaigning tour, like their Axe the Tax stuff, and they're like really riling up the base, and they're doing like an incredible comms job, and they're sort of like uncontested right now. Like, you know, they were like, they're early on, like I remember that like the stuff that they were doing on housing and like the drug crisis and all of that stuff, like they implanted those narratives. And I was like, we should, you know, do something about it. Like we should give them some heat too, whatever. If we're gonna like confront people on Palestine, we should be spending time on them too. And they were like, don't worry, like, you know, the Liberals always like, you know, pull it out. There's still a long time till the next election. And then they were like, when the polls started coming in, like with the lead that they had, they were like, oh my God. And then it's just like, you know, act of God, and the Liberals pulled back again, which I'm like.
Well, in Ontario, they did the same too, right? Remember, Dalton McGuinty had one scandal after another, like awful shit. They spent billions in like starting what was the energy? A gas plant. and then shutting it down and having, anyway, it's a long, kind of boring story, but they were done. And then they're like, but what about Kathleen Wynne, who was his deputy, right? Was McGinty's deputy. It wasn't even like Carney's able to go in and be like, hey, I had nothing to do with this shit. Anything. I wasn't here for the genocide, even though we'll get to that. I didn't put in the carbon tax or do the Emergencies Act, he was able, they were able to do that complete brand shift. And so they do that. And so maybe that's why also progressives are a little soft on Carney, because it's like, did he just save us from Pee-Pee? Like, did he just save us from Polyev? And so we're like, well,
I think Canadians have a bit of like a he's daddy kind of thing, like,
yeah.
They just wanted to be saved by the nice man that played hockey at whatever Ivy League school he went to.
Right.
Oxford, no less.
Oh, well, nice guy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, he's coming, like I said, I was saying earlier, comes in as the nice guy's going to be saving us. And again, it's also sort of a feeling, I think, is why can't we have a little bit more something progressive? Why do we always have to slide to the right? And this is what they want. They want an Overton to the right. People that were basically the resources can market the idea that no, this whole Trudeau is bad because he brought the capital gains, and that's going to ruin all your lives somehow because you all have capital gains.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That's a huge problem for me.
Yeah,
but
sounds like a banker.
When the rich mobilize, it's a decent policy. Like some policies were like, man, it does nothing. But then when they get really riled up, you're like, all right, that's where we hit them. That's what really stresses them out. But so, I'm trying to like sit with some of these folks and go, okay, let's be hopeful. Like it was faux, but I was just like biting my tongue a little bit. And then I think I see who tweeted it out. Anyway, my response to this was, tell me you're joking. What did I see, Aliya? You want to walk us through like his appointment that has, needs unpacking?
Yeah. I mean, so he was the MP for Eglinton Lawrence. And he announced, I don't know, a little bit ago that he wasn't going to run. And I remember people saying like they were like, girl, bye, as though like he was folding under pressure. And I felt disheartened by it because I do feel a little bit like a big problem on the left is like not really being able to like assess our power. And especially with like electoralism, it's like not as complex as some other spaces. Like you can be like, okay, what is our power? And then you could be like, this is a voting block. How much of the voting block have you like gotten on your side? Does the person know that you have a voting block and you control, like, it's really like a recipe. And I think I responded something like, I know everybody's like celebrating this and I'm, whatever, I'm tempted to do so as well. But like someone like this doesn't leave this like spot unless they have something better lined up. And
do you think he knew then?
Like possibly. I
or
just
he has another gig lined up because he's only interim, right? Like he's interim chief.
That's the thing. So like I think that in some way, like I understand, like who knows what the rationale was. Here are the things that I feel like I can pull from this. So, there's been this broad like appeasement strategy from the Liberals to people like Marco Genocido, which, by the way, I just want to say I made that up.
Nice.
Yeah.
I did not know to credit you. I was going to credit the people at Eglinton Lawrence Don Valley for Palestine.
Look, they credited me, but I was sort of like, I don't need credit for this. Please run with it. It's the people's now. It belongs to the people. But now that I'm here, I was just like, wow, it's coming full circle. I'm glad that, like, I just want to say that I'm like proud that it has taken hold,
Fetch, right? Fetch is never going to work. It worked. It worked. I didn't know that. Like, now it feels like I went after you to like, oh, you are the person to unpack this for us.
Yeah, the person who made up the nickname. If we ignore the fact that it's Mendocino it works even better. Like it's a smoother transition. But I always have trouble. Do you guys have trouble with that in Italian? Like, I feel like I always have to look up, like, double C is what sound?
My husband's Italian, and he found out their family had been saying their name wrong for like the longest time until we went to Italy and were corrected. You know, you're checking in, they're like, no, that's not how you say it. And we're like, oh, snap. And, you know, I'm like, is that me? I took your word for it. So, yeah, no.
That's another point for the
Italian all the
people
time
have
anyway.
Crossed over to becoming racial, like the most racialized white people, which I think that they were given that privilege after like Luigi, and maybe there was another great Italian thing that happened recently that, you know, they got props for. But I would say Genocido brings it back down a point. But yeah, I think that like what I think probably happened is like it could have been like a position that he was given or that was like set aside for him earlier on. Because Carney's sort of like his response
as part of that appeasement, you mean?
A little
not
bit,
for like a
also,
job well done. He's shuffled all over the place within the cabinet, right?
Yeah, I mean, also I think that there's like two things. Like I don't know like Liberal Party politics enough to know whether this is like a bullshit reason or not, but I don't find it like, you know, like it doesn't sound like an incredible amount of bullshit that because of Marco's like experience that he would be considered a good person to like link the Trudeau side to the future side, you know? But it is also true that there's like a narrative aspect to it. Like I don't think that Carney maybe was prepared for like the backlash around it. It seems like even some MPs have an issue with it.
Yep. The National Canadian Council of Muslims, right? Yeah. They have a letter there that they're asking folks to sign on and pleading with him to reconsider that kind of appointment. I mean, when it happened, I said it was a shot across the bow for the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. I felt like, you know, he might not have realized the level of backlash, but he had to have known it was like symbolic to a degree to choose somebody who'd been so vocally anti-Palestinian, right? Like he says shit like, I pulled some quotes. Like he says, and he stands by, and this used to be the public safety minister, that calling Zionists terrorists and racists is hate speech and a criminal offense, and people should be locked up for it.
It's his pinned tweet right now. That's his pinned tweet.
Which is also just like, it's literally not. So it's like, you can't just say things are hate. Like, this is the thing that's been killing me the last like couple of years. It's just like, there's no accountability for the media and politicians talking about like what actually, it's all narrative, like what actually like meets the threshold for hate speech according to the criminal code is it's actually very difficult to prosecute for that. Like it's not like someone feels threatened. It's like a very specific thing. And I think that, you know, the fact that he knows better, you know what I mean? Like that he absolutely knows that this isn't hate speech, but also, you know, he was like the like hearings on anti-Semitism that happened in Ottawa several months ago, that where they had a report where they're like actually proposing things like for intimidation to become a criminal offense, which is like a violation of like, it's like, it goes against the charter. Like, it's like such a mess. And I'm like, he's spending a lot of time like building a narrative case for repression.
And the IHRA sort of does start to shape these comments as hate speech.
Totally.
Right? Maybe not a hate crime, but then, you know, the prosecutors are using hate motivated to shape the crimes and increase sentences. So like they don't necessarily even have to meet that threshold of charging you with a hate crime. But if it's tinted with and brought up enough times, and like as you're getting frustrated and saying like, how can they say this when they know it's not true? It reminded me, and it's we don't have to leave this topic, but it's a bit of a transition to Mahmoud Khalil, where Code Pink is interviewing state representative through the hallway and saying, can you make a statement on the student? And he's like, he's a terrorist. He needs to go home. And he just repeats the line over and over again. And he even acknowledges, he even says, this is what I have to say. And he repeats the two lines again. He's like, what don't you understand? That is my statement. And it's almost, well, it's not almost, it's very Orwellian. Whereas if you just keep saying it over and over again, and you demonize or even remove people who would contradict you, you don't allow those press in, you don't allow those comments printed, or you arrest those students, then it becomes the truth.
Yeah.
People just eventually, I don't know the psychological reasons behind it, but it really seems like people just eventually swallow that and make it truth. That's scary, because that's how Trump is behaving, right? He's doing it too, where he's just repeating things that are just fact check, quick fact check, my 8-year-old could fact check him. And he's like, full chest, doesn't matter. That's the new truth. Deal with it.
I mean, it's about power. We're in an era of power and narrative over truth. And I think that Ira is a good, a good case study to look at, because it's really it runs across sovereign state borders in a way, it can be applied in several different contexts. And I think the thing that legal scholars have talked about that makes it so pernicious is that it would be hard to appeal because it's not used officially as policy. It doesn't meet the requirements for the criminal code, but the way that it's been applied in Germany is an extreme example, but I think it's just that's the idea, is it's, I do feel the Toronto police, for example, have been referring to it for a long time, probably even before it was officially adopted. But a couple more things before we move on that I want to say about Marco Genocido is that I think that the thing that I think that someone suggested it when he was doing that weird tweet where he was shoveling snow in order to be I have to shovel the streets because Olivia Chow doesn't know what she's doing or whatever.
Yeah.
And people were A, what? And B, why are you talking about this? And B, this looks like the amount of snow there was a couple of days ago. Are you recycling a pic to score political points against Olivia Chow? And then people in the comments were sort of are we looking at a mayoral run? And
no.
Then one of the MPs, and I think the CBC piece, I think it was about his appointment as chief of staff. They were I thought he was planning a run at Toronto mayor. So I'm going to say that that's probably what we're going to see happen.
There's one last thing I wanted to bring up also in regards to Mr. Mendicini, because I got this messaging and I had a conversation with somebody about this last night. And one of the other things was in regards to his problematic list of different things is also he was also aware of the transfer of Paul Bernardo to a medium security prison. Now, as I was discussing with quite a few other people, transferring him from maximum to medium, that's not really an issue. The guy's over 50. It doesn't really make a difference whether he's in maximum or medium. He's still in prison. He's never going to be coming out of there at any point. But what he did fumble on was that this is, these guys were made aware of it weeks before the transfer was, and they didn't reach out to the families. And when the families reached out to them, they pretended they didn't know anything about this. And I'm like, that's dishonest. Particularly the families of the victims, that is actually dishonest. You should have been up front. You should have been at the front of this to let them know what was going on, to at least help them understand what the process and why this is going on. Again, there's nothing really wrong with it going from maximum to medium. He's still in prison. He still doesn't have any freedom. It's just they don't need that level of security for him anymore because he is an older person now. But he could have done his job in regards to coming out and saying, hey, this is what's going on, go on, so that you're not shocked when you discover this and when it's going to be in the news. This is actually what's going to happen. He's not getting any other chances.
They probably thought that just nobody would blow it up
It's a slap in the face.
It became a PR nightmare. I'm pretty sure this was around, like, this is what caused him to be shuffled from the public safety minister spot. Like, this was how they saved the day. They punished him for that or whatever. And then, you know, the reasons they didn't like him as immigration minister were that he was fiddling with the temporary foreign workers program. You know, the right is mad that he just like expanded it. We're mad because he expanded it without addressing like any of the fucking issues that migrant workers had brought to him. So like everyone's got a reason
that's
to hate him. I've shared the link to sign the letter so folks can try to get rid of him. He is interim, but if Aliya is correct, I'm like still in shock. Like I can't even respond to that because like I'm just like, oh, what a race that'll be. So like what, we've got to back Olivia all gung-ho, or you know,
there's still time
maybe Aliya will make a run for it.
English accent to run. I'm just like, I'm like, if you can't find anyone good, I'm just gonna find some regular someone with an English accent. That is one thing I've noticed about Canada, is that they love a person with an English accent and they don't realize they love it. So,
and good hair, I suppose.
I'll object, but I'm also from La Belle Province, so.
Yeah, exactly. Not you. Sorry. I don't mean you. Like Toronto,
I'm never
especially,
included.
like WASP Central over here, you know?
It's fair.
Oh, no, I'm not. When is the next election for the Toronto mayor?
I was corrected because I said
2
something
years.
Like 2028, and then they were like, no, it's actually sooner than that.
26 or 27, 26. Right? Because we just got to her 26. We just got to, or not that long ago, Olivia's like halfway point.
Yeah.
And like, apparently like, we're still not allowed to criticize her.
I'm not a fan, but I think she's like really getting it hard. Like the way that they got at her for like the worst snowfall that Toronto will probably ever have. I'm just like, what do you want her to do? Is like buy a bunch of plows and then what? Like, and it's not her contract that like it was a Tory negotiated contract.
And plus, like your mayor doesn't micromanage like that stuff. That they're part of the planning. So, but yeah, this is what happens when you privatize your fucking services and you have no control over them, except what you signed off for in some contract. But yeah, no, like she does get unfair, and this isn't on the agenda because like we could go off for some time. But I'm still wholly disappointed. But the idea, again, lesser evils, the idea of Mendocino, Genocido, being up there is infinitely worse. So, but that still won't make me campaign for Olivia. I won't do it.
There'll be others, don't worry.
I won't do it.
Fewer, I'm sure.
Aliya's going to find us one. So, well, I'll hold my breath till then. I mean, I don't even live in the city, but I feel emotionally invested in it. It is my hometown. But let's move on to one of the issues that has me, I mean, it's not a surprise, but it has me really kind of a little bit, I'll be honest, like anxious for the movement. It seems to have hidden next gear, especially in the United States. I'm talking about the arrest and detention, and we'll get into like what that detention has been like because it's fucked up, of Mahmoud Khalil of Columbia University. He is a permanent resident in the United States. So at first it was like they're going to revoke his visa. He doesn't have a visa. His spouse is American. She's 8 months pregnant. And he was detained. Now, the timeline actually starts on, I'll just give us the goods and then we'll unpack it, like what it all means for us. But on March 7th, it was actually Mahmoud that contacted Columbia University and said, you know, I've been doxxed. I am afraid for my safety. Can I get some assistance here? And the very next day, DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security, or, you know, ICE, detain him, and they transfer him and they transfer him and they transfer him, and like the computer does not keep up with it, and no one updates his lawyer or his spouse. And eventually he ends up in Louisiana. So he's picked up in New York State. Then they think he's in New Jersey. His lawyers not until the 12th, March 12th, so 4 days after he had been picked up, did they get any meaningful contact from him. Like, even then it was just like, yes, I am in Louisiana, because they didn't even know where he was. And why was he picked up? So, they're really open about this, that there is no criminal activity suspected. There, even though I talked about like the Congress, or I think it's a state representative just saying he's a terrorist, over and over again. In the discovery or whatever it is, the court documents that the state has to provide or the prosecutors have to provide, his crime, it's not a crime, but they say his presence or activities may have or are likely to have whatever adverse foreign policy effects for the United States. And this is according to the Secretary of State. They have reason to believe his presence or activities will have adverse effects on foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy. So they have openly arrested somebody for saying or doing something that might make their foreign policy jobs harder, which is genocide at the moment. So this is, fascism. I know like some people make this argument that we're not fully in fascism because like we still have labor unions. Like what labor unions? What the fuck are they doing right now? Like what kind of labor unions are you talking about? The ones that just show up every time there's a collective bargaining agreement that they need to get, like, this is fascism, and there's really been no response. Like, a judge has ordered that he can't be deported. I don't even know where the fuck are they trying to deport him? Do either if you know? He's Palestinian.
Yeah, I think he's Palestinian, so I think they'd be trying to deport him back to Palestine, which
but they can't do that.
He probably would become stateless.
Yep. Yeah, because like they're not allowed to return, right? Like that is why he's been processed the way he has in the United States. They can't deport him. He would be stateless, which is you're not supposed to do, but that's according to international law, which we have none. So, yeah, I mean, how's this all making you I'm going to also talk about Colombia, but like, you want to talk about how this case makes you feel or how you think it might impact us? I mean, talking about how he didn't get to his lawyer, I don't know if you folks remember our interview with Yves Angler, or you've heard him tell his story where he couldn't reach his lawyer. And that was like perfectly normal. Like if you hear him in the interview, he's like, well, all the inmates around me were like, yeah, I know these phones used to work. They don't work anymore. And it's the weekend. And so like, that's normal, dude. Like I haven't talked to my lawyer or whatever. So he doesn't know if it was politically motivated or not, like his charges were, but just this, in the shuffling around so he can't have jail support or, even contact his spouse. So this is how they would treat perhaps someone charged for treason.
I have lots of comments on incarceration and the fact that it's used as a tool. But that could be a whole episode on its own.
I'm not going to gatekeep. You could talk about whatever you want.
Yeah, give us a couple of key points.
I mean, the process is the punishment, is the phrase that's heard all the time when it comes to it, from justice abolitionists to everybody else in regards to trying to get reform. The process right now, before you're even convicted, can punish you severely. In Ontario, you're going to be in prison. You're going to be waiting for up to 2 years for a trial. And if you're not being allowed to release a bail, you're in there for as much time as possible. And they use this. And they use this to keep you in there because they know whether or not you're guilty or not, we can hold you. Particularly since it's not a lawyer or a judge that decides in Ontario if you're allowed to be released, it's a justice of the peace, and they're not legally trained. So, and the idea is to keep you in there as long as possible so that you will assign whatever plea deal they want, because it will wear you down. This isn't too dissimilar in regards to what he was saying about. If we can keep you locked up in the system, nobody's checking up on the system. Nobody's seeing in there. There's no cameras going in there to see if there's, these places are correct or not. If there's any fairness, if there's any medical that's being provided to the inmates, if there's any ethical treatment in regards to people getting food on time for Ramadan once sunlight goes down. Nobody's checking these things. Because again, it's, we put them into the system and then we forget about them because, they're there for a reason is the logic. It's the logic that a lot of people are saying. This is why there's so much people going with the rhetoric of like, yeah. We should go jail, no bail. We should be increasing punishment because they deserve it, even though 80% of the people in there haven't been convicted. So yeah, it is part of the design in regards to punishing. That's literally what they want to do. They want to make sure you get in there, and then they want you to feel afraid, especially if you're going to be some like Eve Engler or other people that Jessa and I know who are right now going through the system. They want you to feel that they can do this to you, that they could ruin you. So play along, and maybe we won't send you back there. Just don't talk about Palestine. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
They're certainly trying to send a message with this case, right? And being so brazen about it. They didn't just scoop them up quietly. They had to have known the way Columbia students have been organized, and like they're the ones that took over a building and called it Hins Hall, which obviously inspired, which is named after the young Palestinian child who was murdered, in a car with her family. And like they held that building for quite some time, and are very, very, very well organized and supported. I mean, thankfully Mahmoud has a huge legal team and panel of human rights experts that are assisting him. And yeah, that actually leads right into my point there. And I mean, some people like to point to the fact that this started with, remember, we talked about the executive order that Trump issued that basically told universities, if you allow protests and you don't punish students, you will lose funding. But I mean, Columbia was just also eager to abide by this, and they were inviting ICE onto their campus. When ICE stayed on campus and were collecting students, they refused to allow professors to move classes online because some students were not showing up to class because they were afraid it was a very unsafe environment. They were like, nope, everybody has to be going to class. Like they were baiting their undocumented students. And the reprisals that they have. So before Mahmoud was arrested, they had expelled students from the, uprising, from Hins Hall. And they then released the full video of the police violence from the inside. And then, the doxing, it kind of blows up on campus. What's his name? I don't like to remember those Zios names, but they've got a professor on campus, Davidson? Davidai, thank you. That is just so stays on campus, even though he's been removed from campus, and they're blaming him for this. But I agree with the comment there that I've highlighted for viewers, that it's definitely something they were all too eager to participate in. And now they've even, what did they, can we share this link? I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, I can do that.
It's the Blue Pashmina tweet there that shows the latest reprisals in, on top of firing the student union leader. They're about to go into negotiations for a contract, and they expel that student. And the newest reprisals that they're suggesting are possible multi-year suspensions, temporary degree revocations. They're going to take your degree back for protesting for Palestine, and expulsions of the students in Hamilton Hall is the name of the building originally, Hins Hall. But they are just, and we're seeing the University of Vancouver Island University. I always get it wrong. Someone there knows what I'm talking about, but they're going back after students after months and months of it being done and promising amnesty. And they're going, oh, well, is there space for this? We'll go back and, set an example. When the weather gets warmer, don't think of doing this again, right? Like they know the student movements are starting to gear up. And they're trying to send a message to maybe silence them and push them back, but I have a feeling it's going to have the opposite effect because people are mobilizing around this, and the retributions that these schools, I mean, just this week on Blueprints, so like our interview with Jeremy talks about the University of Calgary Like, we're like, oh, the United States is so bad. I can give you so many examples of like our folks acting the same way, you know, albeit not with ICE, that added kind of horrible element. But the University of Calgary spent all kinds of resources, like watching students, watching social media, sending videos around to staff and security that said, you know, painted Palestinian rocks were anti-Semitic, and, you know, just feeding into anti-Palestinian racism before the encampment ever started. Then, you know, they're cheering with cops about how it all went down afterwards. Like, they weren't just, you know, reacting to the encampment. They were like active participants in the Zionist lobby and the movement there. And yeah, we ended up calling the episode like Student Suppression by Any Means Necessary. And like, that's kind of Mahmoud Khalil's case kind of summed up as well. Right? Like, we'll show you what happens. So like, anybody, they're even saying anybody with a green card is not safe. Even though we've granted you permanent residency, they're basically saying you're only safe to not be deported if you are a naturalized American citizen, which is, yeah, opens up a whole new kind of level of fascism there. But
there's also questions I've been hearing by people, because since they're going from, you know, people who are undocumented or visas expired to now people with green cards going in there, like, they're getting closer and closer to the citizens. And people are starting to ask, like, because of the rate of escalation, how long is it? Like, this is a rapid escalation of fascism, straight out. Who's next? And if you can do this for you know, and again, talking to people who are okay with this, if you could do this for Palestine, you know, what's to stop that? And it's just any criticism of the government. You don't pay attention here, you're going to miss out when you're going to be losing rights over there.
Yeah. I think that one thing, though, I do want to say about the fascism point is that, like, I mean, it could be careening in that direction, but I do think, like, the fact that there still is like an independent judiciary that can like stop a deportation or whatever is like a crucial like element, you know, like there could be like fascist crackdowns, but I do think it's important to be sort of like specific, because I feel like the word has sort of become like, honestly, in some ways, like even the word genocide, like, has unfortunately, like, the thing I struggle with in movements a lot is that like the fact of something happening normalizes it, just the fact of it happening. So it's like, you know, when we went through like the encampment raids in 2021, people were appalled in Toronto at the level of violence against homeless people. And then there's just it's like, that's on the table now. We've seen it happen once, you know? And so I do think that there is an element of the right leadership that does this intentionally, where they send out a bellwether and then they look to see how people scatter on that. And I do, the point has been made that, like, you know, liberal Zionists are maybe feeling a bit squeamish about this latest state reach. And I do think that the point was to try and see sort of like how, you know, how things go. I think that's maybe it was intentionally done in a public way, also having the effect of like, you know, potentially like as a warning. Like I do think that in this case there will be, you know, it is gonna sort of like rev things up a little bit, at least with Colombia. But I think that oftentimes, and even if we think about like criminalization of protest in like Toronto or in the Canadian context, I do think that even minor charges, and to the point about like charges getting thrown out, like people's imagination about what it feels like to be arrested and have charges, it's like an Alfred Hitchcock film and why they're so effective. It's like the imagination of what that's like and how that impacts you is always, I think, often worse, or at least you don't know the things that are gonna affect you most. But that just the specter of that actually is enough. And I think that as like material conditions get like worse for our class across the board, like I do sort of feel like for the most part the state can just like let it ride and people get tired, you know, like I think people have been, fighting this genocide a part of their lives for so many months, suffering consequences, and also just like losing out on other opportunities that people need for survival. And I think that even though in the movement, I feel like everybody understood that this wasn't a real ceasefire. It wasn't a rah rah yes win. That there was a need at that time to have some sort of sense of reprieve, just even some moment to maybe it's a little landing between endless sets of staircases where you could just take a sip of water or something before
Yeah
so
no, it's
and I think
Yeah.
your point, Jessa, also, sorry, I wanted to say to your point about the Canadian context and how we can tend to sort of over focus on the American examples. I have been, in some ways the crackdown is more overt and explicit in the States. But I think that in Canada, our media is so much less, let's say, diverse. Less.
You can say that.
Yeah, there's less of we just don't have enough of a democracy. I always talk about blueprints of disruption because I do feel like you're one of the few shows that is actually talking about movements and actually talking to organizers consistently and in depth, and where we can draw lessons and case studies, which is super helpful. But the States has a lot more of a complex mediascape. The fact that he has so much legal representation. There's more legal scholars that there are more public legal scholars that are speaking out against it. Here, there's kind of crickets about similar infringements that have happened. I actually think that we're a little less well equipped for something like this here.
And more communities, some communities are less prepared than others, right? When talking to some city, Toronto has a pretty robust legal support system and movement lawyers. I mean, they're stretched thin of resources, but sometimes you talk to other cities who are having similar problems. Toronto police are, well funded and have, they have Project Resolute and all that behind them, but they're just there's almost nothing. There's a few movement lawyers there on call to do what they got to do, but it's not as healthy or robust, and sometimes that will end up deterring people if we don't have those systems. Because imagine how it feels. Mahmoud can't see it now, but his family can, his friends can, to see that level of support, not just the numbers that show up, but having these top-notch lawyers that aren't going to charge a dime and are taking a stand. And Eve, we've seen lots of arrests, but the arrest of Eve, I think, as a journalist, there was some uproar, but even we didn't see much coming from the Canadian Association of Journalists. Penn wrote a letter, obviously, but you think that
Eve is too beyond the pale, but there is support of Western Standard for a right wing.
I was just going to bring that up. You have time to write about Western Standard, but nothing about Eve Engler in regards to his criticism, which is based on comments on Twitter.
You know what it is, though, is that it's the obsession with journalistic objectivity. That's the line for them, where he is an activist because he is ideologically oriented, and I'm RIP Canadian media journalism. Good luck. If you're gonna cling on to this idea that there is such thing as objectivity and journalistic standards haven't been massively decimated around Palestine, and that nobody should trust you and nobody does anymore, and they're right to not trust you. But you're
I'm
still
just
going to
I'm
play
just
into that.
confused as how we're able to say objectivity and Western standard in this conversation at the same time.
Honestly.
Well, that's it. It's like this, they pretend to not have bias because their bias is so streamlined, it's so mainstreams rather, that when we hear it, we don't recognize it as propaganda or as bias, right? Because it's the system we live under, right? Like they speak of capitalism as, like a given. And although like, if you're like, of course, that's the system we live, but that's bias, right? Like they drip with it when you read. It's just, they mean left bias, right? It's very specific.
Yeah.
They don't say that, but to just speak uncritically, like to just repeat a police report, I mean, that's speaking with obvious bias.
Yeah.
Repeating the state line when you're supposed to be that fact checker of government, right? Like you're supposed to be that a bit of a safeguard between the populace and what the state tries to put out there, that filter for us. And when they don't bother to even filter, and they're like, because we don't have enough money to do it, it's like, you're owned by U.S. hedge funds. You've got money. You just choose not to spend it on educating us, clearly. But yeah, it's interesting to see how people respond to, we see a lot of these ICE detentions and, ramping up deportations. But the second you grab a Canadian at the border, right, now we're going to see a little bit more media. Joe, you brought this to our attention.
I did. So this is one that I know a lot of people have been tracking. Take a look themselves, and this is a bit of a horror show for quite a few people. And it's also something I've been trying to sort of send out to, and as well as people I know, sending out to other friends and family or acquaintances or whatever. Traveling to the States should be concerning as a Canadian. It already was to a certain extent, but now, for example, this particular individual, 35 years old, was traveling there on a visa. Apparently something was wrong with her visa, and they sent her immediately over to ICE detainment. She was there for 11 days. She's supposed to be released today, but she was just apparently it took her also same thing as Mahmoud Khalil, disappeared the system at some points, could not be contacted. At one point when they did contact, they said, yeah, they're sleeping on mattresses on the grounds and they're all bound with chains. Like, it is questionable in regards to the conditions as to how these ICE detentions are. But these are private detention centers because that's how the U.S. runs it. So there's people are now being sent here for whatever reason. We've had this particular person, and this also mirrors quite a bit with a very similar situation, which was a British citizen that was also detained at the U.S. border and also sent to ICE. And they were also part of the system for quite a while. Again, also spent about 11 days in there. So it is no longer, they said they're only going to be going after the illegals and the undocumented, whatever their language is. But it doesn't seem to be there. They're just grabbing anybody now and tossing it into the ICE detention center.
And that's how they operate, right? Like, there are roundups, and it's like, you got your papers. Like, who walks around with their papers? And so if you look like you're undocumented, i.e. you look like Latin American, I imagine, is their target for the most part, but I don't think they're going to discriminate. If you're not white and you're in a neighborhood that they're looking, I mean, you better have some sort of documentation on you. And like, holy Gestapo. And a lot of folks who live near border towns are kind of used to like checkpoints and this kind of reach in terms of like border security and Department of Homeland Security and whatnot. But you're seeing it in urban centers and at workplaces and outside schools. And yeah, it's just now that they've kind of fine-tuned, that's like the catch-all, but now they're actually using this weapon to go after Palestinian solidarity activists, right? Rubio's confirmed, and that absolutely they will revoke the green card of anybody who supports Hamas. And I don't know how explicit you have to be about that support. I imagine anything alongside the Palestinian resistance kind of fits the bill for them. But And where does it end? Like, what part of their foreign policy? Because, like, they're looking at a lot of places that have I've always have questioned foreign policy and domestic policy. I mean, we see him saying, if you go after a Tesla dealership, that is a crime against the state, and we're going to crack down. It's like,
well, I think when we look into what's going on with ICE and how it's being used, I think we need to make sure that we understand that it's not going to be limited to what their original concept was, which is just dealing with the mass immigration problem that they claim to have from the southern border. They're going to expand this out to, you're Canadian, we're going to give you a hard time too. We're already talking about if you're going to be here longer than 30 days, we want all your information because we are going to log your records of everything you're doing and who you are. They are trying to make Canada appear as problematic as Mexico because, again, it's part of the rhetoric that they're trying to build up, and it's getting dangerous in regards to what they're mentioning. They're going to also do it to anybody who's, Palestinian, because now it's going to help Israel. They're also going to try to see if they can also do it, and I'm sure we're probably going to see within the next 6 months, ways to use this in regards to people who are even just disagreeing with Trump. Because, again, that's what he wants to do. You cannot dissent. We still have that, there's still that legal protection in regards to the judicial system, as Aliya pointed out, but I'm going to have to ask the question of how long till that changes? How long till that becomes questionable? You can change it in regards to legislation where the legal system has to side with it, but or possibly with attempts with executive orders. I mean,
yeah, and then just that danger that Aliya again said, like, of normalizing like that kind of behavior based on our response to it, or the democratic response to it, which has not been all that robust either. But I think, if we're going to talk about him protecting his foreign policy, let's talk a little bit about that foreign policy and, it impacts us as well. Talking about his plan for Gaza and his just like open support for Israel doing whatever they need to do to bring Hamas to its knees narrative. And the latest escalation, I mean, since the ceasefire started, I think like every week we've given examples of, violence in the West Bank has been ongoing, and ethnic cleansing and mass demolition of residential buildings, and the updates you can get from the West Bank daily are just like horrific on its own. But even in Gaza, there hasn't been a true ceasefire. And just a few, I lost track of the day, but sometime this week, Israel announced, I think like 4 days ago, that they would turn off the electricity in Gaza. And one can imagine that the infrastructure already is probably decimated in terms of like who is capable of running electricity anymore. But I think one of the tweets that I saw there, it was just like, maybe even it was you, Joe, who commented, why does Israel even have the power or the right, the capacity to turn off the electricity to somewhere they don't occupy, right? Isn't that their fucking line all the time? We don't actually occupy Gaza. We pulled out of it. But right now they're not letting any, they've shut down the crossings and they've turned off electricity. So, trying to pretend like that's not any form of occupation or that we're actually still under a ceasefire is kind of a stretch. Anybody else want to comment on or have any other updates like that come from Gaza or the West Bank this week?
Aliya looks like she's ready to go. Go for it.
I mean, I just wanted to like note on this that like, I don't know what it means practically, but I do feel like in the short time that like Carney's been like, it is kind of like, whatever, it could just be lip service, but the liberals have been so mealy-mouthed about this stuff. And like in the short time that he's been in leadership, he's made like a couple of statements that are like actually like a more direct than like Trudeau, Jolie, or whatever have. He said like, Israel must adhere to humanitarian law. Like, he's like commented on this electricity shutoff. That is not to say he's gonna like do anything, or that he has leverage.
There's no or else in his statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is like, you know, we're if we're fighting with America, and America is sort of like the primary driver here, it wouldn't make, I don't like, you know, I think it's not even, I think we need to just get away from this idea that it's about values or personal values. Those don't matter. Like, it's about like any US president is going to be a president who has to, you know, kill a lot of civilians to maintain their hegemony. So I think that I guess just the broader point that I wanted to make here is that, like, we have to think about or analyze what the US is doing in the context of its falling hegemony, like on the world stage, like the threat of like BRICS and, you know, China specifically. And I think that like, I think that there's also like an element of smoke screening from Trump. Like, I do think that, you know, there is, and it's really hard to kind of sift through this like fog in a way, but I do think a lot of it is like theater. I think
Wag
that
the dog.
Yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised if the whole like Zelensky thing was like entirely performance. Not least because they're both actor, you know, performers. But
the scary part is not knowing what it's a smokescreen for, right? You're
that's
like,
the thing.
What am I supposed to be watching then?
You know, in this situation, like, you know, okay, so, you know, like Trump knows when he said you don't have the cards, it's true. Zelensky didn't have the cards, you know, like that is a fact.
Maybe that's
you
why
don't have
Zelensky
the standing to say this and come here and say this. It's like, it's true. I'm just thinking on the power front. I'm like, in some way, like we are getting the truth of America now more, you know, people are like, Americans seem like aliens from a different planet to me right now, because they're like, even the left is like mourning this idea of America that it never was. And I just feel like, wow, you know,
we're doing the same with Canada too, right? Like, I want to make Canada great again. Like, and you're hearing this from people who should hear that coming out of their mouth and then cringe, but they're not, right? And then they're putting Canadian flags back in their bio, and
well, even like we have like left pundits, left commentators or whatever, who spend like 72 hours straight on the keyboard being like, I would defend Canada with like weapons if needed. And I'm like, you would? Like,
against who? Because we could use you right now. Like, you know, I'm not advocating for a violent revolt, but if you've got some to give, there's some Indigenous people who need their land back. Honestly, you could start there. I mean, get all fired up, practice.
Yeah, like
show us your commitment.
People who actually know how to use guns, like maybe let's start with that. Or I don't know. I'm just sort of like, yeah, it's a bit of a mess in terms of like nationalism right now. But I guess another thing that I was thinking about, and this is not related to like specifics around what's happening in Gaza, but it is like I've been thinking about like the bigger picture stuff, because America has now enough sort of fealty from the Middle Eastern, like enough of the Middle Eastern states, you know, that like Egypt and Jordan and all of that. And I think that like Trump keeps like moving on to the next like negotiation point for taking Palestinians. But I do find it interesting that he wasn't able to pressure Jordan, Egypt. Like, what is it actually? Like, I think we move on too quickly without thinking about, okay, like what leverage did they have? How, like
why do others fold so quickly?
Why were they able to refuse? Was that performance? Who knows? But then like you would think, really, in thinking about the US support for Israel, and if it was just about economic interests, that they do have enough, they do seem to have enough control over Middle Eastern states to like still have control over the region. But maybe that would shift if Israel wasn't there. Who knows? But I think we just need to think about those things, because I'm like, is there like a, you know, like, is the influence of like Christian Zionism and evangelical Christian doctrine like in America so strong that there is like that additional rationale for maintaining like Israel's control in the region.
Yeah, some people like I'm. Do most people know what Aliya is talking about? I wonder. You know, the idea that
Oh yeah, the
uh,
rapture. Yeah.
yeah, that the rapture will only come about once all Jews have returned to Israel. And so that's where this sometimes very irrational, seemingly irrational support comes from Christian extremists,
Christian
right?
Zionists.
Yeah, you could call them that. Evangelical Christians for the most part, which make up, you know, a large part of a voting bloc that Aliya is talking about, you know, having a recipe for elections. It is, I remember hearing the numbers, I don't have them with me now, but it is a large number of Americans that like identify as evangelical. So whether they buy into all of it, you know, you don't know, but sorry, I kind of like laugh because it's like you can't sometimes you have rational actors and you're like even you know you and I are sitting here trying to think like what are they really trying to do, what do they really want, and when they really want is like this story of rapture and like that's what's motivating them politically, it's like oh my god, I don't know how to calculate that anymore. It stops making sense to me a little bit, but I think the worst part is like everything that's happening, it seems like, and it's like overwhelming, right? It's one thing after another, like you said, is also coming to terms with the fact that so many people chose this. You know, like then you kind of, that becomes this other thing to unpack that, you know, we're not going to do today. It's just like, how did so many people, you know, are presented with this and make that choice? Like, where are we mentally or where the American society or, you know, we're not that far off in terms of how we view Canadian nationalism and whatnot. But yeah, it's like, what is the problem there? Like, what work do we need to do so that people aren't so openly endorsing this? But I think there's a lot of people struggling. Like Canadian MAGA is for sure going like, I don't know how to feel right now. But you know, more and more Americans that are impacted by the cuts and by the moves that he's making, I think, you know, maybe they'll wake up politically. And maybe I'm being naive, but sometimes it takes something like this for folks to really realize, you know, when it's so open and brazen, like with the mask off, they get to see it a little bit clearer, right? And stop looking as them as saviors, which is so ick. No one's coming to save you, you know, like that. We have that problem too. We do that a lot, right? We think of like, oh, who could lead the NDP, right? If Matthew Green would just lead the NDP, we would all be saved. And it's like, okay, that's really not a good long-term solution, people. You know, like you got to think of what kind of work at the organizing level, at the community level that needs to be done so that if that were to happen, if that was your ideal, that it would actually do something in power. But yeah. Does anybody else have anything else to say about Isn't Real and Free Palestine? It's like the algorithm must just love the fuck out of us, right? Writing a description for what we're going to talk about. I'm always thinking that going like, this is just one red flag after another, but whatever. We do what we do. Let's maybe move on then to kind of a more productive part of the show. Not that it's not productive to know what's going on, but there are people doing stuff about all of this. There's people fighting back on all sorts of different levels, and we will try to keep you up to speed. And I'm definitely going to miss some. So like follow our feed on Instagram. I try to boost events that I think folks, both virtual and in person, but if I won't boost in-person events if you aren't taking COVID precautions, but I'm glad that you're still organizing. But follow our feed because it's not just my content. I do try to boost previous guests and organizers. So you're just going to get like a sampling of what I was able to pull from this week that I thought interested me. Joe, you're right. I see you in the notes here, so you're ready with the links. I know this.
I am.
So the first disruptive update that we have is kind of like a shameless plug for Blueprints of Disruption, which sometimes I do. But this week I interviewed two refuseniks these are Israeli youth who refuse to go into the draft, into conscription, into service for the IDF. They're doing a speaking tour. So, you can tune in on Tuesday to hear me speak with them. But I imagine they've got a lot more to say than, the 40-45 minutes that I was able to provide. They are doing a Shabbat. What day is it today? Friday. So they're doing a Shabbat dinner tonight. You probably won't be able to get tickets for that. It's probably too late for that. But the next link there is actually the speaking tour, and they're going right across Canada, and some, I think they're hitting Kingston. There are some places in Ontario that folks will be able to catch up with them, and then they basically fly over to BC. And, it's hard for them to speak, right? Because they're trying to highlight their case while acknowledging what they're doing is nothing compared to, what Palestinians are having to do. They're trying to make the best, I think, of their circumstances. There's refusers and then there's people who publicly refuse. So they've chosen to publicly refuse and make a campaign about it. But I'll tell you, although it's interesting to speak to them, it was very depressing to hear how they view where the Israeli society's at. We just talk about the American psyche politically, and Canadians, we talk about a lot. We try to figure out what the fuck's wrong with us, why we do what we do electorally or politically speaking. But, hearing about, they call it a sobering away from peace. There's a Hebrew name from it. I'm going to mangle it, so I won't try, and I don't have my notes with me, but it's this idea that anybody who is even kind of borderline interested in peace before kind of has awakened and sobered away from that, and their battles just keeps getting harder and harder to be anti-Zionist within the Zionist state. Part of that discussion was hard too, because I didn't mean to really go into this, but now that I'm talking about it, autism and all, just bleh. But I'm trying to write questions for them, right? And I'm kind of angry. I'll be honest, because they're not here, so I don't have that pressure. But I was kind of angry. I'm like, this is the least you could fucking do, is not sign up for the IDF, right? But they're 18 and 19. They were born into this settler state like I was. I'm born into a settler state built on genocide, ethnic cleansing, continued colonial violence, right? And I'm struggling with what do I do? How do I do enough? How do I decolonize myself and the spaces I'm in and Canada? And, you never feel like you're doing enough. And so it was hard. It was hard for me to actually interview them, and I could see it's hard for them to tell their stories and not want to prioritize themselves, because they are talking about themselves, but the Palestinian cause. So yeah, I think I was just confronted with my role as a settler a little bit. I felt uncomfortable at moments, and that's important, right? It's part of decolonizing yourself, right? I was oh, what do I expect them to do inside the Israeli state, an 18-year-old kid, right? Other than, not go into the IDF and then make noise about it, and then go on a speaking tour to try to tell people that there are actually anti-Zionists within Israel and stuff. So they're holding webinars as well, not just in-person speaking engagements. So see if you can find that there. Again, that's with Independent Jewish Voices, who get a lot of work done. Right. We even talked about Anna over in the West Bank. She's with Independent Jewish Voices as well. If you're not following Anna's Substack too, you should be. Anna Littman on Substack. Anybody have any disruptive updates they want to talk about? Because then I'll just I'll keep rolling through them, and sometimes you guys don't get to say anything. But
I wonder if I could just say something about the sort of refuseniks thing. Because I do think on the left, this kind of thing has come up, in the North American context of these people are getting lauded for, doing the bare minimum or whatever. But I do think thinking from an organizer in the belly of the beast here, from that perspective, I forget who it was, a left journalist, was in Israel, I think, prior to October 7th and would interview like regular civilians there and talked about how, and it's
Jesse
true,
Brown, was it?
No, oh my God. No, it was I think she's American. But I was like watching her videos because it was such a simple point, but it was actually really impactful, where she was like, why does Israel prevent like civilians from speaking to a North American audience? And the reason is because you talk to a random civilian and they have extremely like fascist, like genocidal viewpoints that they casually put out there. We've seen like little glimpses of it, but like the reason why Israel has such a tight spokesperson structure is because they are feeding the West narrative that is totally different from what Israelis and people in the region are seeing. And like I have a good friend, Eula Benevolsky, who released a video. She's an artist in Toronto, and she released a video when she finally revoked her Israeli citizenship. She is from the USSR originally, and she grew up on the Lebanon border, because like a lot of those USSR Jews were like treated pretty poorly by Israelis also, like we're seen as second-class citizens, like, you know, being in the most shitty, like dangerous area, and like also being, you know, treated really badly by Israelis, like they were lesser or whatever. And also, you know, in the context of Israel, sort of Zionists knowing that some people who came from the USSR just came, like pretended to be Jewish. So they didn't even care really. They just wanted to increase their population. Anyhow, she revoked, what is it? She like not revoked, she gave up her citizenship, and made a video talking about her experiences in Israel. And I think until like now, like I've been friends with her for years and years and years, and she's talked about this, and she's talked about refusing to go into the IDF. She has a funny story about it where she basically says that, you know, if they like let her into the IDF, she would like kill all the soldiers. And they were like, okay, you're gonna get a mental health whatever. But you know,
deemed unfit for service.
Exactly, yeah. So but it was so scary for her to do that as a youth. And like I don't think I fully understood, like even when she was giving up her citizenship, I was like, wouldn't it make sense to like strategically keep it in case you can X, Y, or Z? But I think that what you understand when you know people from there is how much our understanding of Israeli society is like not anywhere close to the reality. Like we can't actually even I think compare like our role in the settler state. I do think we ought to, but I do think it's like a very different context. And the amount of like, there are anti-Zionist Jews in Israel, but like there was an anti-Zionist Jewish organizer in Israel who said that like if we were to get them all together in one place, I don't think it would be more than 500 people in the entire country. So like we cannot pretend. And that was Eula's experience too. It was incredibly isolating. It's still very triggering because, you know, when she expresses her opinions on Facebook and stuff, like people she was acquaintances with will say like awful stuff to her, and she'll have to block them and things like that. But it is very much like the like social control is exerted through the populace too. So it's like if you can imagine being a teenager, already being like uncomfortable, all of the like struggles of being a teenager,
you just want to fit in.
Yeah. And then experiencing not only socialized, like it's not just about doing your jail time and then your whatever. It's like there are benefits that are also tied to mandatory IDF service. Like there is people will like terrorize you for making that choice. Like your peers and stuff will like, you know, and then you don't have really anywhere to go for like people who don't have like dual citizenship or whatever. They're stuck there. And it's like depressing often. And yeah, so I guess all to say, like, I do think that we need to start thinking about not necessarily like what the role of people like these refuseniks is in talking about the Palestinian plight, because we have that. We know like a lot of that. I need them to talk about what Israeli society is like, because that's not the narrative we're getting here.
Well, you'll like the episode then.
Great.
Because they also talk about the support network they've been forced to make because it's so isolating and there's so few of them. And it's so scary to come out into that, you know? And they want as many people as possible to come out publicly, not just refuse based on values, but to make a statement out of it. And then that just ups the risk for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's... Yeah, I wasn't going to ask them about how they felt about the state of Palestine or an update like that. I had to struggle with that interview personally but I did find value in it still, you know, even though it was a bit delicate at times. And yeah, because I screwed something up, editing is going to be fun, but that's not for you to worry about. Yeah, so that'll be up Tuesday. I would love some feedback from that as well. Like sometimes I'm not sure, you know, if we're doing the right thing, but I do feel like it was a value discussion, just also as settlers here and having to create support networks because times can be tough, right? And even having our political viewpoints is not the same as theirs, as isolating, but it does have that level of isolation and, you know, being called terrorist supporters and whatnot. So hopefully folks will find value in that and hearing a little bit of what they have to say. I'm going to move on to the next update, or it's not, there's a few workshops that I thought people would be interested in. And so the first one is from the Climate Justice Organizing Hub. I'll drop... Oh, Joe, you're already there. Thank you. They're actually they're doing a virtual workshop that I think speaks to some of the things that we're talking about and just like what comes out of what we're talking about. And that's like building cultures of care in organizing spaces. So just from their blurb, it's like the practice of care before productivity, because we all live under capitalism and we tend to prioritize like our output. And we, you know, if you're talking about Palestinian solidarity, folks have been going full steam for 16, 17 months now. And it's just a reminder to go back to the roots of organizing, you know, check in on people. You can socialize. It's like there's a level of care that needs to go into our organizing that sometimes when we're in a rush or we're just dealing with one emergency after the other that we might forget about. So you can sign up for that or, you know, just kind of keep that in mind. Sometimes you sign up for them and you can't make them. They'll send you the information anyway. So, yeah, I thought people could just think about that. And it also kind of reminded me, there was a Bernie Sanders kind of TikTok that went around and he's just holding a town hall, right? And he's almost one-liners from the crowd. You know, how are you feeling? And people are like, overwhelmed, can't pay the bills. But some are being very specific. I don't know if I can buy my kid glasses. And it was a reminder to me, I think, as an organizer to add those check-ins to your organizing or your meetings or however you're gathering. Like, give people space to just tell how they feel, right? To unload a little bit. We sometimes undervalue that as an action, right? We're always wanting to plan something, which makes sense. But yeah, there's other aspects to organizing that we can't forget about. There's another Lunch and Learn that I'm actually co-facilitating along with Kim Bradshaw. She's been a guest on the show here. She runs Greenbelt Guardians of Ontario. And together we're going to do, it's a series, so it's once a month. It's called Think Global and Act Local. This one for March 19th, folks can sign up. It's all free. All the events that I share are usually free. And it's going to be interesting. It's going to unpack the theory of hospicing modernity, or more specifically, like the house of modernity. And that like sounds really, I hate when we talk about theory like that. To me, it sounds really lofty. It's just a way to examine the power structures that got us into this predicament, or that we're in. And by viewing it through this lens, it also helps you unpack, you know, where you think you could go from here. And so it's just a Lunch and Learn. So casually folks can just watch the video with us. It's like 15-minute video, and then we'll unpack it together. Just kind of a round table discussion on what we pulled from it. Really relaxed. That's virtual, so folks can sign up for that. And I just want to flag people that I actually, I want to ask you too, have you ever heard of hospicing modernity or the House of Modernity as a theory? Because I hadn't until I signed up, like until Kim kind of chose this as a topic. And so I, watched the video, and I was kind of fascinated by it. So like, I hope folks will sign up for it, because it's, that's something I can unpack in our updates at all. And I really don't feel like I'm doing it justice to explain what it is. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to forward you to the video to see what you think about it if you have time for it, because it's quite interesting. And don't worry, Marxists, it works into your theories as well. It's not to replace Marxism. But again, moving on to more disruptive updates, folks need to take a look at campuses near them. Palestinian solidarity movements on campus are really gearing up. So they've added a real educational element to what they're doing. Not that they haven't always, like if anyone's ever been on a university campus, even years and years and years ago, there's no shortage of ways to learn more about the Palestinian cause and whatnot. But, obviously we're in a different gear, and students haven't disappeared. I know they're not in encampments anymore, but there's a lot of action. So Queens, UBC, they're still working on divestment at Queens, and they've got a direct action plan. UBC is trying to gear up for a strike, a student strike. So, wherever you are, find the local campus. You don't have to be a student. Supports can come from all sorts of places, alumni included, but even then you don't have to be. It can be a local, Palestinian solidarity group, because you don't have one, join the campus one. So I could probably give you a list of all these different campuses and what they're doing, but you're better off just kind of finding one near you. Anybody here have any, ties to campuses and know what they're up to? Don't want to.
I haven't heard much update in regards to the Ottawa one. I know they were looking into it, but last year they went pretty late in regards to being one of the last campuses to shut down. I'm not sure if they're going to be looking into restarting back up or not. And I know there's definitely some pushback from Ottawa youth. It's the same way as we're seeing on campuses across Canada, where they're being a little bit more aggressive if they have a hint of a word of an encampment showing back up.
I imagine folks will start to see, like the United States campuses, I imagine they're going to become a bit of a front lines in terms of the fight against Trump, even just response to what's happening to the students of Columbia. And our last encampments, not that we are followers, but it was like sprung up first, mostly in the United States, and students here followed suit. So yeah, it's, it doesn't get enough attention, but they are still doing the work there on campuses. And I recently was updated on a movement here, and this one's easy. You could drop the link if you want, but votepalestine.ca. So a whole bunch of, looks like smaller organizations have formed a coalition of sorts. I don't know for sure, like, who's behind it or who's organizing this totally, but the idea behind it is to make Palestine an election issue. And, they're making a plan for this. So to push your local candidates, to make it part of the debate, there's all sorts of ways they've provided for folks to plug in to either campaigns that have already started where you are, or perhaps they will help you start your own chapter or give you the tools to be able to have some influence in what I imagine is a fast approaching federal election. So they're calling it the Palestine Platform, is kind of the work that's going on right now. But to find more information, it is the website that Joe has got pulled up there, votepalestine.ca. And you could take a pledge there, or you can just kind of gather the information. But, we talked about that. Like, how do we decide what goes on the platform? If we let Carney and Pierre Poilievre decide what we're going to be talking about, it's not going to be pretty. I mean, a lot of tariffs and how to handle the U.S. will likely dominate the discussion, and like who could be tougher against Trump battle. But if folks want to interject and maybe get something else on the agenda, that is one way you can plug in. Who do you all have in your writing? Like, what do you I've got a conservative no matter like what we do.
I've got a liberal no matter what we do.
Who is it? Oh, you'll say where you live, but anyway.
It's in Ottawa South. It's McGinty's old area.
Really? That didn't turn them off, liberals?
Nope. It's been
Nothing
a
will
liberal.
then.
Yeah, it has been a liberal stronghold for, I think, older than me, and I'm not young.
Aliya, what about you? I imagine you're in Toronto. You probably have a liberal.
Well, we have a liberal right now. We have Arif Virani. I'm Parkdale High Park, but he's leaving unless he changes his mind. He's got the like sort of Obama second term look, you know, like the like rapid aging in a short period of time from like stress, it seems like.
Yeah.
Thing going. So he's not running again. But we have, I think, I don't know if she's announced it already, but Butila Carpoche, who's our MPP, is going to be running federally, probably, is what I've heard. I'm not following it that closely, but I think that, yeah, that's, you know, she has got a good chance of flipping it NDP.
You have an interesting writing then.
Yeah, the conservative is usually like not a contender. But there have been, you know, like the NDPs put people up to try to take it, but RF was, I guess, a stronger candidate. But yeah, I think that it could change.
Batula has a lot of grassroots organizers that will definitely hop on that campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's one of the Ontario NDP MPPs that, like, you know, isn't going to suffer much of the blowback that the Ontario NDP had. You know, there was a few kind of good ones that folks were, you know, really responsive to constituents, or, you know, like just like in the rumblings, people are like, oh, I'm so done with the NDP, but, you know, they gave a pass to Jill Andrew, and Batula is one of them. Who was out in Scarborough? Dolly. I mean, people are like, Dolly's a good one. I mean, I'm not their constituents. I can't speak to that, but if people feel that way, it does help going into a local campaign.
I mean, I have like a bit of a hard, I feel like my experience with Butila is that it came out that she had like an income property, a second property, like she was a landlord. And she had been showing up to all these like rent strikes during the pandemic. And my brother, who was really involved in like organizing in Parkdale around rent strikes, was like questioning her about it. Like, I think he tweeted something at her like, you know, like, will we see you at the next like fuck all landlords rally or whatever, or something like that. Like just, and then they basically blocked him. And when I contacted her office about it, it was like, you know, anti-harassment, like we try to maintain a, you know, a healthy work environment and that kind of thing. I guess I like, you know, even if you have grassroots support, I just fundamentally believe the only way to really run a grassroots candidate, and not in an aesthetic way, is to like actually have them be accountable to the grassroots and like structurally, like not just in terms of vibes.
That's one of the problems with the, you know, the political system that we have too. Yeah, it's like there really are no mechanisms built in within the parties or within the electoral structure that, you know, allow recall or, you know, force the issue of consulting with your constituents. You know, we see them able to just really check out if they want to for 4 years. But
and also their votes are like, it's like I just find it interesting always in the elections where supposedly like left or progressive, whatever that means these days, candidates will talk about like, that, you know, your representative matters, like I will represent you. And it's like, but we don't talk about the fact that the NDP whips votes. So I'm just sort of like what is that? It's just a contradiction. Like,
I know, so they want applause when they allow a free vote, which doesn't happen all that often, but they're like, we will allow a free vote. And everyone's, oh, wow, that's so progressive of you. Like, oh, so generous. People are like, or controversial. You're going to allow people to vote however they want. Like, that, it's such a big deal. It gets a moment. You get a gold star for it. It's like the bar, what's someone say? The bar is so low, like it's in hell.
Yeah.
So any kind of consultation we get, we're just like, okay, we'll take it. We'll take the lesser evil, whatever it is, at this point. I've got one last update before Aliya's going to give us her activist tip of the week. And I should have brought it. No, not that one. I've dropped it in the private chat. So yeah, I can see you. I can see you, Joe, in the notes. I'm going to skip that one because I don't have enough information to share with folks. But this one here, I thought it was interesting the way they framed it, especially. It's the world beyond war. I mean, part of their campaign has always been to have an arms embargo, right? So, like, if you're wondering as a Canadian, like, what is my role in ending the genocide or stopping the siege on Gaza? And quite often our answer is go after Canadian weapons. The trade with Israel, this one is kind of taking a different tact, but all the same, really. And it's like looking at Trump, and it's like, how can we push back against Trump's tariffs and, you know, threats of annexation and being the 51st second state? And it's like, because, you know, Greenland might beat us to it, but it's, can we stop buying their warplanes? You know, can we stop funding the very war machine that some people are convinced is going to, you know, cross over the border? Like, is that not a bargaining chip that we have? So when pressed, you know, folks aren't really going to like this, but I believe when pressed Polyev, or no, he couldn't get an answer out of him. But Jagmeet Singh, when pressed by Ivan Gler, which was like his first outing after he got out of jail, he went right to a Jagmeet Singh press conference, it looks like, and asked him, like, would you cancel this if you were prime minister or whatever? And he wouldn't answer. Like, you're never going to be prime minister. You can answer. You can be like, I would totally do it, right? Like, you just say it. But he was like, well, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. So folks are going to ask Carney, like, will you at least cancel this fighter jet? The way Doug Ford canceled Starlink, but probably hasn't, right? Like, he took the Terrasan and took a bag out, like, put your right foot in, you take your right foot out. But so this is just one way. So you can sign the letter here, but like always, you don't have to just sign the petition. A World Beyond War is really good at getting in touch with folks who reach out to them, to plug them into direct actions or to help you plan your own wherever you are. So that is something you can get behind, be like a big fuck you to Trump. I don't know how big of a fuck you it would be. It's just like one military contract out of many that they likely have. But surely we can all agree we don't want American fighter jets. Or maybe we can't all agree on that. I don't know.
No, we can agree on that. I mean, there was something that somebody else posted, and I haven't checked to see the validity of it, but one of the issues also with purchasing more American equipment is that we become more dependent on the Americans, the very people right now we're concerned about invading us. So, for example, their equipment will require their parts. We can't do those, as well as their software. And this is the big one that people are concerned is.
It's like buying software. An Apple phone, right? Like only Apple can
pretty
fix
much.
It.
It's an Apple phone, and it's concerning to a lot of people that are within that are in the know in regards to this, because the software like these things are complex pieces of machinery. Let's be honest. There are so many computer systems within there just to maintain flight, because they're going so fast, and all the weaponry and everything else going on. But we don't have access to the source, and so people are concerned. Like, what if the U.S. military puts in a kill switch into the Canadian ones? Suddenly they come in and none of our jets work.
I mean, they did exploding pagers, so like I don't know why I'm laughing. Anything is possible at this. But I mean, I'd be happy with kill switches. Like, we don't need the fucking jets. How about that? Like, we don't have to go find another source, by the way. Like, you don't have to, what are you going to do? Buy them from China? Like, I don't care. Don't buy them at all. Build houses.
You can buy them from England. Yeah,
What's
you can
the
buy them from
price
France.
tag?
You can buy them from England if we need the jets. I mean, it's going to be a hard argument for, and people are still going to want to get jets. We can get to people who are not trying to take us over. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I don't want more jets. $19 billion. The jets
Yeah.
cost $19 billion, and with a life cycle cost, so however long that they live,
Hmm.
and you maintain them, $70 billion.
Yeah.
I don't know how long these jets until they stop bombing. How long they
Well,
can do that for, but 70 billion. So that is 89. We'll round it up because they're always wrong. This 90 billion is definitely going to turn into like 150 billion with a B.
yeah.
Anyway,
And Canada has a tendency of holding on to something far past its expiration date. We did it with the CF-18s. So we had those things for a very long time. What was it? Was it the Sea Kings that we also had, where they were literally falling out of the sky because they were way past their age.
yeah, okay, like rescue helicopters. I understand having
Yep.
like I understand that, but why do we need fighter jets? Why do we need 88 of them? 88 of them? Where are we going? I don't want to know. I mean, I do, but I don't because
It's part of that NATO demand for 2%.
that's right. Everyone, NATO is like gearing everybody up to be able to defend themselves against Russia. But
And now Trump.
yeah, a bonus is the contracts with Lockheed Martin. So that's all part of the BDS campaign. So we can like kill two birds with one stone with that action. I'm sure World Beyond War, that is not beyond them. They are pros at this point. So if you're not following them, follow them, please. They are responsible for a lot of the direct actions that you see in Canada against arm manufacturers specifically. So, I mean, but that's not all they do. They are multi-talented. All right, Aliya. So we're at the point of our broadcast where we try to give some practical tips for folks that are looking to interfere with all this nonsense in a good way, in a positive way. So last week, what did we do? We did a banner drop last week. We've done wheat pasting, and then we've done things as controversial, I suppose. Not really, but what to do when you're arrested and how to expect dealing with bail conditions. Aliya, what are you going to treat us to today?
I'm going to talk a little bit about identifying targets, which is not really like a fun tip, but I'm going to try and make it fun tippy. The reason I want to talk about this is that it is, I feel like what I've noticed and also, been guilty of in campaigns I've worked on is like not really doing the things before the action. We're so action oriented, and the thinking is always very reactive. It's very short term. And I think that like if we're gonna win, we have to get out of that. Like before you even pick up a thing of wheat to make paste with, I think I just want to like kind of talk briefly about like some questions you can ask yourself to try to think through this question of like how to identify a target and what is the goal.
I'm taking notes.
I can just send it to you also after, but I think like because my like theory of change and maybe hopefully something that's shared by a lot of people is that like what gives us power, like we need to start thinking about power and like what gives us power, and what we've even noticed among like I've organized with unhoused people, I've organized with artists, like kind of some of the more precarious elements of our class, and they have been able to collectively exert power to win material gains. So I fundamentally am a strong believer that our power comes from organizing people, right? And so, you have to build that broad base, and you have to think about like who and like how many, and how to kind of create a crisis for, who you're trying to create a crisis for, who your target is. So some questions. What is the goal? Very, very simple question, but I think that often it's not clearly defined, or something that happens is that people have demands, but I've heard people say like, well, we didn't think we'd actually get that, or we don't know how to get that. Like, we don't know how to get there. I think it's very important, that you have demands that are not, because anything that you don't think you can get, that's just a symbolic act. That becomes a plea. That becomes a plea from power to like give you concessions based on charity, because they like you, because, you know, you've moved them to tears or whatever. And that's just not how power works, especially right now. They have to concede power, you know, they have to try and contain you by giving you concessions. So you should always have goals that are very clear, that you think that you can get. And that if you have a big goal, like say, throwing one out there, decommodification of housing, that's a big goal, right? You need to be able to identify the little goals, the steps leading up to it, because you also just lose people if you don't have like little wins that are achievable. You gain people when you create those steps, that pathway. So that could look like, you know, if you're shooting for the decommodification of housing, maybe the first step could be, you know, create a tenant union in your building. And maybe then like try to get involved in creating like a tenant union in or like helping with or connecting to tenant unions across the city. Maybe they are people who share your landlord, like, you know, just those kinds of questions. They should always be like, you know, so maybe even the first step could be something very simple, like talking to other tenants in your building, you know, about the issues they're facing, door knocking. Anyway, we'll move on to the second one. The other thing that I find that is unclear for people is who are the possible targets. And I think
targets for crisis or targets for mobilizing.
So if your goal is, let's say, okay, so if your goal is Scotiabank divests from like their entire fund from Elbit Systems, right?
Which it is.
Yeah. Scotiabank is the target there, right? But it could also be the fund manager, David Fingold, who is solely, we don't know the relationship between Scotiabank and the fund manager for that fund, but he's like heavily invested in Israel, they're over-indexed. And so like, if you can identify a person, that is always a better, like a more, like when you can identify a specific person, as specific as you can get, it could be several people. Like it could be, you know, you can have like a target that will get you to the broader target. So with
like putting a face on that exactly. Power.
So it's like people have critiqued our campaign by saying like, well, why don't you just go to Scotiabank Arena? If Scotiabank is the target, why are you attacking the Gillers? And the thing is you then have to think about like, what leverage do we have against Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, who runs the Scotiabank Arena? You know, what leverage do we actually have against anyone at Scotiabank? The reason we went through these festivals that have them as their lead sponsor is that as cultural workers, we had the power to withhold our labor, withhold our work, not allow Scotiabank to use it as an art washing practice for their material investments in genocide, right? And then that was what kind of worked. But it was really about like thinking through that, like how do we get to our fundamental target? Like what is our leverage, you know? Clear goal. And the clear goal made such a huge difference, honestly, in terms of cultural workers and organizations being willing to like be with the campaign for the long haul, which is such an important part of what like created pressure. So that's very important. And
you folks always had somewhere to go too when you made those steps, right? You got bits of divestment, or even when Scotia broke off with the Giller, you're like, we're not done. So like there's a victory to celebrate, but then, you know, we have another step, like we're still climbing.
Yeah. You always want to feel like there's something else. And like going back to the student movement, like I think the hard part about the like escalation of the encampments is like, it's hard to imagine what it would look like to escalate beyond the encampments in a way, you know? And that's always the problem of movements, sorry, that's a Freudian slip, but movements, as you know, is that like, you know, they're responding to an issue, a crisis. And then the often that escalation happens very quickly, especially in this genocide. We were like, okay, you know, we'll escalate and then the genocide will stop. Like this has to stop. And, but I think the challenge is like to imagine a longer timeline, and to imagine like escalation building. So then just gonna run through some other quick questions that you can ask, and maybe I can like provide a links to resources if people want to do a little more in-depth reading. But who has power over your target or targets? So like, when people push for like electoral, like through electoral mechanisms, sometimes like I find this especially on the city level, it's like, or with policing, it's like it's very unclear who has power over the Toronto police, for example, right? Or like with municipal stuff, it's like sometimes people will think that like a city staff member would be the target, or they're responsible for something, but like because people are used to like their council or the mayor being the like their representative, they'll go to that person. So just really understanding like how those as much as you can, and like it could be a matter of like talking to people who are insiders or reading stuff or whatever. There's like soft there's like soft connections, or like connections that are more about like social relationships, and some that are actually more like with the budget, this is what Aliya Chow's role is in relation to the city budget. Like the city manager drafts the budget, there is a budget committee, and then Aliya Chow, like those are very concrete mechanisms that you can easily find information on.
Because I think sometimes people think like they're just rational actors that don't really answer to anybody, or we forget that there's power above them sometimes, and so
Totally.
we think if we just explain the issue, they'll act in a way that's according.
That's the
but
thing.
And we spend a lot of time doing that when really you're not even maybe talking to the right person, or you don't understand the levers you need to pull to make that one person act, right? So
exactly. Yeah, I think that like I won't go too much into the other questions, but it's like it's really about like expanding your power. Once you have that identification, it's like, what power do we have? How do we build our power against that target, like over time? And so
where are they vulnerable, right?
Yeah. And then like when you do an action, like when you do any of these actions that people are doing, you have to also, I don't like really like some organizers I've talked to, like people feel differently about like calling something a win or a loss, but I really like the framing of like in analyzing it, especially in thinking of the longer term. Like a win makes you think, okay, we're done, but like we're in struggle. Like we are fighting for like the whole thing. We don't want like these little like half partial victories or whatever. You need to like, I think that I like the framing of like, did we gain or lose power against our target? And there's no right or wrong answer, but having that conversation is important, and like discussing that with your comrades, and like, being able to come to at least some overlapping analysis actually really impacts like the decisions you make next. And so, yeah,
sometimes those wins came with concessions. So doing that analysis of whether we gained or lost power is important. I mean, sometimes it might mean taking a little shine off of a victory.
Yeah.
But it came with a better understanding of where you're at right now.
Totally.
Sometimes you have to give something up to gain those victories, right? And
yeah,
how much too bad and do that analysis too beforehand, right? Before you get there.
Totally. Like we need to be really realistic, and also to recognize containment strategies. Like if you just kind of don't talk about it or think about it, then like I guess to give the like campus organizing example, like how many like situations were there where people won like very concrete material wins, and I think that that's the thing, is people don't even talk about that aspect. It's really about like the more symbolic aspects of like militancy, and like Humboldt was the like the most militant wing of the student intifada, but like we're not thinking about like actual material wins, and those are actually what we're going for when we think about militancy. Like people only think about like using, I don't know, like the bonk water bottle thing, or like whatever formations, but militancy is about so much more than that actually, and it's a lot about like the things that I'm talking about, I think. And so I think that, yeah, it's just my general feeling that like in movements there are so many things that like have the form of like being activism or organizing or struggle, or like the sort of like format or the aesthetics of them, but when you look at actually the strategy, then you realize that it's actually like a plea from power to give you something. like demands that you don't think you can win, or that you haven't like worked out how you can win them, that's please sir, can I have a whatever, can I have this demand, like, and there's
Find
so
ways
many
to take
like
it.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
Or even like, expression as a mode of political action, like talking about Palestine, or like making a speech or something like that. It's like individual expression, especially if it's not part of a larger movement, then it's actually nothing more than a plea, like an appeal to values or morals. And I think we really, really, really need to be able to get away from that if we're going to win anything.
That is
And
a whole lot more. No, that's a whole lot more than I expected out of the activist tip of the week. Like, no, like my brain, like you've just started me on this whole thing, then we've got to sign off. So it's not going to happen on here, but thank you for that. And like, she just like pulled that out of nothing, right? Like it was like, you're ready to help me with the banner drop because I left that in the notes, right? She's like, oh, I got some more information for this. I'm like, oh, actually, no, like that's old news. And it was like, yeah, okay, fine, I got this. And like that was
well,
some,
I've been
like
thinking
really...
about it. I think about it a lot. If you ask my
Clearly.
close friends, they're like, shut up about it, So thank you for providing me the outlet for a rant, because,
Oh, well, that's what we're here for. And like, yeah, that was a whole lot of blueprints of disruption, right? Like
That's what the sign says.
Yeah, read, taps the sign. That's what we're here for. So yeah, no, preaching to the choir when it came to, like, no, you taught me, like, and you reminded me a lot of like lessons that I'd probably learned, but when we get into this rush and you kind of forget, or some of these basics that really can determine whether or not you're wasting energy, precious energy and time right now.
We don't have a lot of it, and I think that we don't often think about like the cost of losing morale. Like it's like there's a very, like, again, with like analyzing the moment, or like, doing that kind of like honest look. It's like, oh, well, we tried something, and if we fail, it's okay. And like, sure, you don't need to be hard on yourself, but I do think that like there is a cost, especially when we don't see examples of like the left exerting power, to your point earlier, Jessa, about like the kind of defanging of unions in this country, and how even like, talking about the homeless fight, like, if not even like 2 decades ago, the unions were like showing up at encampment evictions and recognized that like those were, workers that they were like fighting alongside. And I think we've, there's just been a big shift. And so I think we need to like, show that kind of like discipline and that kind of resolve, and not have like a fish's memory.
Yeah. It's also about, like, a lot of people rest on labor coming to save us as well. Like if we could only mobilize labor, big L labor, then we could do this, that, and the other thing. But I think that just goes back to the advice you were giving earlier, stop making pleas. Like there's people doing work within labor to bring it along to where we need to be. And, but for those who maybe aren't workers in that more traditional sense, or definitely aren't unionized workers, that doesn't mean we can't organize ourselves and just take what we need as well, So.
Yeah, it's a little harder. There's like not as much of a roadmap, but I think that like it's worth trying to apply these things. And I think I like, consider myself still a baby organizer, though a lot of organizer comrades of mine say that I can't do that given what I've been through in the last while. But I just didn't really think about these things until I started organizing in this particular way. I've learned a lot from people who have been in this game a long time, and from like, reading and just really trying to like understand. And honestly, the last thing I'll say on this is just that like, if you don't want to like read theory, like there's this obsession like, oh, we need to read theory to understand. Or if you don't want to like even read like, or find like methodologies, or that doesn't really resonate with you, read like case studies, read like histories of struggle, stories of struggle that come from like the people who did it, not from like an academic perspective or whatever, from the like organizers. There's so much out there that you can learn from. And it like will really get into the sort of like nitty gritty, and then you can sort of compare it to this moment. So I think that there's just not enough of that, of like understanding that organizing is a discipline, and that those are carried in the like accounts of organizers through time.
Absolutely. Like I interviewed Danny Morrison from the IRA, and he spoke of his time with his comrades in prison and how they spent most of that time just reading about previous revolutions. And they came out because like there's a lot of time to just read and maybe do push-ups, you know, and they were just like, they were ready mentally, you know, they could see that other people had done it and been victorious. So that was like that fuel that you needed. But the how-to some degree was also there, you know, rather than thinking they had to start from scratch and figure out how to, you know, beat this huge power on their own. And they really felt like, yeah, they could stand on the shoulders, you know, of the people that had come before them. And build
That's the exact phrase I think about. So I was just I had it in my head.
I stole it from you.
No, but it's really true. It's like we do stand on the shoulders of giants, like, and it's very humbling actually, but it also makes you feel like, man, like, yeah, we can do a lot. Like people have organized in the most brutal conditions.
Yeah, we have roadmaps. Like the unions might have their, like, you know, a history, a more clearer path, but we've also got our own roadmaps that we can pull out. They're just a little more hard. They're harder to find. We'll keep pulling them out for you, you know, in terms of like the content that we create here. But thank you, Joe. Thank you, Aliya. That's it for Rabble Rants this week. We do it every Friday at noon Eastern. We originally said we'd go an hour, and then we went 2, and then Aliya came out with pure fire for the activist tip of the week. And I just had a million questions and comments. So she probably could have got through that in 5 minutes, but I was like, what? You know, I wanted to unpack that a little bit more. So for those who stayed, you know, to the very end, I appreciate it. And I think I will try to repurpose specifically that conversation at the end there. So, or maybe develop on it, Aliya. I'll be in your DMs.
All right.
For sure.
But no, for the right people.
Yes. But thank you so much for showing up, for unpacking this, sharing your knowledge, even if it did come from the people before you. We'll still give you creds. And also for coining Genocido. It is perfect. Yeah, I don't want to type his name or say his name correctly anymore anyway. So you gave me that as well as a gift. And thanks, Joe. You got any parting words for the audience before I end the stream?
No, not really. But again, I actually do also approve Genocido.
Excellent.
I'm adding it to my list.
Consensus building. We love it.
And we don't have to pay our royalties. We don't work like that around here.
No, it belongs to people. Please feel free to use it and even take credit, especially if Genocido gets like a plum position with the feds. I don't really want that going around, you know.
I mean, you could always tag Aliya Pabani there, and just so she can laugh, right? Give her a smile for the day. But yeah, no, I appreciate everybody's time. Folks who contributed in the comments as well. I like when that adds to the discussion. So keep that up, and we'll see you next Friday.